Hey guys, Kiwi here. In this video, I'll be discussing episode 709 of The Walking Dead, comparing it to the comic book series as I point out similarities between the two. I always personally love appreciating whenever the show reimagines certain spots of the comics on the big screen. This episode being no exception. Let's go ahead and jump right into it, with warnings of spoilers for everything in the comics, along with the show up to Season 7 Episode 9, Rockin' the Road. So the first thing that I wanted to point out is the meeting that Rick and group have with Gregory in the Barrington house. This conversation was a very effective remix of multiple conversations all compiled into one. First off, in the comics, Rick actually went to talk to Gregory about this right after Glenn's death, while in the show it was only Maggie and Sasha who went there. Also, during this meeting, Maggie asks Gregory how many fighters they have, only for him to respond telling her that he doesn't even know how many people are in his community in total, let alone the ones that would want to fight. This is in reference to a conversation between Gregory and Jesus in issue 109, as Jesus is truly starting to get fed up with Gregory's BS. And you know, as annoying as Gregory is, I'd just like to take a moment to mention of how great an actor they chose for Gregory in the show, as he just accurately represents him so perfectly in every way, at least in my opinion. Moving on though, as Enid shows off a crowd of people that she's riled together from the hilltop, we notice another background character from the comics, Brianna. Now, her name is Bertree in the show, but for those of you who don't remember, she was actually one of the hilltop survivors saved by Rick and group, mainly Glenn apparently, back in 6/11 during their initial visit to the hilltop itself. Now, she'll become more important as a supporting character, becoming closer to Maggie just as she does in the comics. I'm sure I'll be breaking her down more in a future video, but for now, as everyone's leaving the hilltop to go back to Alexandria, Jesus stops them, telling everyone that it's time that he introduces them to King Ezekiel.
You don't have to get back. Not yet. It's one of theirs, long range. I think it's time I introduce you to Ezekiel. King Ezekiel.
King?
This was taken from issue 107, as Jesus makes the same decision to tell them. Now, it actually takes him way longer to introduce Rick to Ezekiel in the show, as it took Rick longer to come around and realize that they need to eliminate the Saviors. During the comic story arc, Rick is shown to be already secretly plotting against the Saviors with Jesus at the end of issue 102, which is, mind you, only 2 issues after Glenn dies, while in the show it took him the entirety of Season 7A to come to the realization of marching to war. So Jesus brings Rick and group to the outskirts of the kingdom, awaiting an escort to be brought into the community. This was entirely ripped out of issue 108 and expanded on.
It's called the Kingdom?
Yeah, I didn't name it.
How much farther?
Well, technically we're already here, at the kingdom. Well, it's Outer Edge.
In the comics, Rick actually first was brought there by Jesus alone to meet Ezekiel, bringing along everyone else from Alexandria during his second visit. In the show, however, we see everyone join Rick and Jesus to the kingdom on their first go.
Who dares to trespass on the sovereign land of the...
Oh, shit. Jesus, is that you?
Your friends, who are they?
This is Rick Grimes. He's the leader of a like-minded community. We would like to request an audience with King Ezekiel.
Just like in the comics, Rick continues to give Jesus a hard time about the name of the kingdom, along with the fact that Ezekiel calls himself a king. Jesus just tells him that he didn't name the place himself and to just go along with it, and he informs Rick to also never enter the kingdom without an escort as they leave their vehicle behind. Then, of course, once they get inside the kingdom and meet Ezekiel himself, we get to see Rick's classic reaction to Shiva, with Jesus forgetting to mention that King Ezekiel had a tiger.
This is... Oh, right, I forgot to mention.
Yeah, tiger.
Why does everyone forget to tell people that Ezekiel has a tiger? Yeah, maybe you could get used to it yourself, but don't you think that's like the first thing you should tell people, alongside the fact that he calls himself a king? And although Rick reacts the same way in the comics, this was originally stolen by Carol in 702, so I'm surprised that they still did it here. But I'm not complaining, as it was definitely funny as well. So even though King Ezekiel seems completely sympathetic towards Rick and his people, showing that he understands them and their plans, he refuses to help them due to the fact that he cannot bear the idea of sending his men out to die. Now, in order to fully explain this, I've actually got to explain a future story arc from the comics that will actually probably end up happening during the first half of Season 8, after Ezekiel finally joins Rick's side in rising up. Alright, so the fear of Ezekiel sending his men out to die directly relates to the story arc within All Out War during issue 118, where separate teams lead multiple groups of soldiers to Negan's outposts in order to take them out. Rick, Jesus, and Ezekiel all take teams to different outposts at the same time in order to take them out simultaneously, since they had a limited window of opportunity to be successful without the outposts getting any backup. We see a monologue from Ezekiel as he explains to Michonne the aftermath of what happened. Although Rick's confident group took out the most powerful outpost, Ezekiel's was unsuccessful. Ezekiel explains that unlike Rick, he has never led men into battle. It took him way too long to realize that the battle was lost, resulting in all of his men being killed before his eyes. He ran in horror as zombies drawn from the gunfire gave him somewhat of a distraction from the saviors shooting at him, but after not too long he himself got surrounded by zombies. Out of nowhere, Shiva jumps into the mix and starts taking out the zombies left and right, saving Ezekiel's life. And as Ezekiel barely makes it out alive, Shiva goes down fighting, as this day was sadly shown to be her last. Ezekiel feels completely crushed by the loss of his men along with Shiva, feeling guilt in all of this, which could very well be a horrific situation from Season 8 that we may have to deal with. Now I could see Carol taking Michonne's place during this conversation, as they've remixed that pretty obviously for those of you who have read the comics. My main point in explaining all of this is the fact that Ezekiel's already starting to show reluctance in the show. During the introduction of him in the comics, he seemed completely on board with the plan to rebel against the Saviors, while in the show, he has yet to agree. If they stress out Ezekiel's reasoning of not wanting to put his men in harm's way, it'll hurt that much more down the line when all of his men are slaughtered in front of him, along with Shiva being taken away from him on top of it. Let me know how you guys feel about all that, and how accurate do you think they'll keep it to the comics. I feel like it's lining up very nicely, so it's not too far off from saying that Shiva may have the same fate. It's also worth mentioning that this slaughter claims the life of Richard as well, so we'll have to see about that too. On a different note, as I said earlier, in the comics there are two main times that Rick visits the kingdom during the March to War. The first includes his initial visit alone, while his second visit includes him bringing along everyone else to get better acquainted. Now in the show, Rick actually visits the kingdom with everyone for the first time, remixing how this all goes down. During his first visit in the comics, Dwight actually shows up, claiming that he wants to join the rebellion as well, helping take down Negan. Now I actually have a full video up on the channel speculating over Dwight going to the kingdom, but I definitely believe that we will see this by the end of this season. It all depends when Ezekiel will come around, as he'll have to be willing to bring Dwight into the mix. And on a completely unrelated note, I wanted to mention a particular phrase that Michonne told Rick as they're escaping from that horde on the highway later in the episode. She says that they're the ones who live, which reminds me of the famous lines Andrea's always spouting out to Rick in the comics.
We're here. We made it. We can make it. We can. We're the ones who live.
To make a long story short, when Andrea and Rick first wound up together, Rick wanted to push her away because he didn't want her to end up dying because of him like Lori or Judith. Andrea had to help him think logically, helping him realize that neither of them were going to die, telling him that they're the ones who live. Ever since this has happened, Andrea constantly references this principle, saying things like we're the ones who live and we don't die. Rick and Andrea have been happily together in the comics since, and it seems like Michonne is definitely fully developing that role. Now near the end of the episode, Aaron and Eric have a scene together which relates directly to a few conversations between them in the comics, mainly issue 106. I'm glad that both of them keep getting more screen time as background characters as well. Aaron is really starting to step up, especially in the show, this being no different. Aaron's probably going to be going through a lot during Season 8 if their storylines stay the same as the comics, so I can definitely see that pushing him even further into the show as he becomes more important in general. What do you guys think about all of these comparisons to the comics? Whether the show is remixing lines into a different character or a different scene entirely? In my opinion, it's interesting noticing the hints of the comic book material shining through the show as we see glimpses of what inspired the episode. Anyways, that pretty much does it for this episode, guys. Leave any thoughts and opinions in the comments section below, along with a rating on the video if you've enjoyed anything I've said today. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.